Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of Talking Germany, the show where we do just that. And my guest today is the man who is currently in charge of the agency that administers and provides access to the huge repository of files and other information collected by the former East German secret police, the notorious Stasi. And here he is, Roland Jahn. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to have you here on Talking Germany. Now, before Roland Jahn was appointed to his present post, he was a campaigning journalist and activist both in the East and the West. Under the former communist leaders of East Germany, he was arrested on several occasions and eventually forcibly expelled from the country. And I'm sure we can very much look forward to hearing what Roland Jahn has to say about the following topics. Piecing together the past, find out how computer technology is being used to electronically reconstruct shredded Stasi files. Trail of Hate, we look at the decade-long campaign of racist murders carried out by 3 neo-Nazi terrorists from Roland Jahn's hometown. And what remains after the fall of the Berlin Wall? Most East German products failed to find a market in the new Germany, but not all. Roland Jahn, I'd like to begin by more for our viewers than for you, reading out the full title, the formal title of your office, which is the Office of the Federal Commissioner Preserving the Records of the State Security Service of the former German Democratic Republic. Wow, yeah?
Typically German.
There you go, yeah? The Stasi Archive, that's what it's known for short. What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
I organize. I make sure that our work can be done properly, that people can access the files the Stasi compiled on them. Many people suffered and were put in prison because of East Germany's secret police. It's a big help for them to be able to see what files the secret police had on them.
Okay, how many people each year actually apply to get to see these files that you're talking about?
All in all, almost 2 million people have already seen their files. Last year, 22 years after the fall of the wall, we received more than 80,000 applications from people wanting to see their files.
It's a huge number. And just to, I travelled an awful lot in East Germany and other communist countries before the wall came down, and I know that the Stasi had an eye on me at some stage, yeah? If I were to apply for my file today, when would I get to see it?
First, you have to apply to gain access to your files, and this access is personalized. You get the files and the documents that were compiled on you personally, and you don't see anything about all the other people who were spied on. But you can also apply as a journalist, and then you see all the files on the Stasi's activity. In other words, all the people who worked for the secret police, the Stasi officers, the informants. You can get all this information by applying as a journalist or as an academic.
Okay, and how long would it take? What period of time would I have to wait before I get to see my file?
As a journalist, you can get access relatively quickly, because you're trying to produce something, a film, a newspaper article, and we want people to be able to read the article as soon as possible. In other words, the publication date is taken into consideration when the application is being processed. But it takes a lot longer to put together a personalized account of the Stasi files. There are so many people asking for access, and we have to prepare everything very carefully in order to protect the data on the people contained in the files. We get so many applications, and the waiting time is currently 2 years.
Wir haben auch eine große Anzahl von Antragstellern und da dauert es fast über 2 Jahre.
Aha. 2 years.
Ja, so viele Arbeit.
Yes, it's a lot of work and it takes a long time. You make an application and relatively soon, in a matter of weeks, you're informed whether there's anything on you in the archive. Roughly speaking, about a third of applicants are not in the archive. 2/3 have at least a small amount, and some have big files.
Okay. Some interesting information there, some interesting first impressions from Roland Jahn. Here now is more.
In favour, 535 deputies.
In 2011, the Bundestag elected Roland Jahn to head the federal authority controlling the files of East Germany's secret police, the Stasi. At age 58, the TV journalist succeeded Marianne Birtler, who had run the authority for a decade. Himself a victim of the Stasi, Jahn became chief custodian of the organization's archive, preserving the records of the Stasi's apparatus of oppression. As a young man, Roland Jahn lived in the city of Jena. In the 1970s, it was an important East German center for industry and higher education, teeming with workers and students. A lively opposition movement gradually took root there. Jahn repeatedly criticized the authoritarian East German regime in public. For his outspokenness, he was expelled from the university and imprisoned. But he kept on protesting. People who knew him then still remember his unbending personality.
He was always reliable. That's a very important quality, especially when you're politically active. Unreliable people are always a problem. Roland was never a problem. He was always a very good partner.
But Jahn was a problem for the state. In 1983, the Stasi deported him, sending him off in chains on a train to West Germany. After his forced extradition, he had to struggle to start over in West Berlin.
I realized what it meant to lose one's country. And when I spoke to my mother on the phone and she said, "They've taken our son away from us," I realized that life on the other side of the wall in the West was little more than half freedom.
As a journalist, Jahn worked to hasten the demise of East Germany's communist regime. In 1989, he managed to smuggle film cameras into the country and obtained the first covertly shot images of opposition demonstrations there. Those pictures helped bring down the Berlin Wall. Later, Jahn hunted down Stasi officers still working in public administration. Here he confronts a former Stasi operative. The man admits to taking part, but says it's all in the past. Shedding light on the darkest Stasi chapters has become Roland Jahn's life work. After beginning his tenure as archive chief a year ago, Jahn has received support from across the political spectrum, including from Chancellor Angela Merkel. He puts his ideas to work in a state authority with 1,800 employees. That's a lot of bureaucracy. One focus of his work is on the topic of conforming with dictatorship. Not just in the Stasi's crimes, but also the small, everyday acts that betray the trust of others, both in the past and now. Today, he's our guest on Talking Germany, Roland Jahn.
I'd like to go back to your very early days, to you as a young child. When was the first time that you looked around and you realized, I live in a country which has a wall around it? How old were you?
It took a long time to realize I was living in a country where liberty is limited, where there's a wall that's stopping you from living freely. The wall wasn't just in Berlin. The wall was part of everyday life. And as a young person, you just want to have a nice life, to party, to decide how you live. And that was the point when I realized that I was being restricted. I wasn't allowed to look the way I wanted. I couldn't have my hair the way I wanted. I couldn't listen to the music I wanted. Western music like the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin. As a young person, those were the bands I wanted to listen to and play at parties. And the state didn't allow it.
Partys in unserer Klasse. Und das hat der Staat nicht zugelassen.
You put on a record by the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin, and what happened next?
No, we didn't have records. We listened to the music on the radio. We could receive West German radio in the East, and that's the music we played. Every afternoon or evening, we tuned into West German youth shows and recorded the music on our tape recorders. And then we'd play those tapes when our school class got together for parties.
Interesting for me is I wonder what your parents thought about all this, because your parents, I'm guessing now, they lived through the Second World War. They lived through the post-war period. They lived in a country where they saw a wall being built around them, and then they have a son who is getting into trouble, who's a troublemaker. At least for the state.
Yes, it did get me into a lot of disputes with my parents. My parents had experienced the Nazi era and the war. When my father was 17, he lost a leg in the war, and he was deeply marked by the things that politics and war can do. And he always said, keep out of politics, don't waste your time with it. And above all, try to fit in, keep your head down. You'll only get into trouble. And of course that brought us into conflict, because I wanted to have my little bit of liberty. And I wanted to be free to say what I thought.
You didn't listen to your father.
I didn't do what my father said.
And he was right, because there was trouble.
Not completely. I did listen to him, because I knew that if I spoke my mind freely, then it would affect my family. My father always said, if you say what you think, then it will endanger me in my job. You're harming my chance of working. In such cases, I did keep my head down. But when I didn't, there was always trouble at home.
But you did protest, and there were painful consequences for you. You were in prison. You were in solitary confinement.
I did protest, and it did have consequences for me. I was put in prison, but it also had consequences for my family. My father did suffer as a result. For example, he was thrown out of the football club that he'd helped set up because his son was considered an enemy of the state.
And you're talking about the painful consequences for your father there, but it was for you. Explain to me what it is like to be in a prison cell on your own.
That's the problem. If you're thrown in jail, then it is, of course, a very difficult situation. Sitting in an isolation cell, being interrogated daily by the Stasi. But it also had a big impact on my parents. And it was also hard for my partner and my child. My daughter was 3 at the time, and being separated from her was the worst part of it all. It made it very difficult to carry on. I often looked at photos of her and wondered whether the price for speaking one's mind wasn't too high, or whether it was the wrong way to do it, whether it's more important to be there for a child rather than standing up against a regime.
Okay, so a lot of people who had lives like you, who suffered like you, they come to the Stasi archive, they read their file, and they read horrible things about how people, what the Stasi did to them, and they're very angry. Do they go out and look for what Germans call Rache, revenge? Does that happen?
I don't think people feel like taking revenge when they read the files. I didn't anyway. When I read my Stasi files, I felt enlightened. It brought me clarity and truth. I didn't want to take revenge. I wanted to start a dialogue with the people who worked for the Stasi. I wanted to know why they ended up betraying me. I wanted to know why the Stasi officers took the decisions they did. And above all, I wanted to know how they're dealing with it today. Are they prepared to admit what they did? And are they prepared to ask for forgiveness?
Sind sie auch bereit, Entschuldigung zu bitten?
It's a fascinating story all round. One thing that I don't understand is 16,000 sacks of these little scraps of paper. Where are all the sacks stored? Where are they kept?
What the Stasi left behind.
Die Stasi hinterlassen hat.
Are they here in Berlin or are they?
No, sie sind in Berlin.
No, some are in Berlin, but others are in depots in other regions. We've got big warehouses full of the sacks in places like Magdeburg.
Zum Beispiel in Magdeburg.
They must be very big storerooms.
Yes, they're big. And the most important thing is that it's a legacy. We want to know exactly what it contains, and that's why it's vital that it's not just destroyed. We have no idea what secrets are stored in it. We've manually reconstructed the first sackfuls and have found some really important files that show us what the Stasi were up to. We just saw the example of how they stole identities. They forged passports and sent agents all over the world who were working under false identities. It's important to find out all their procedures and who was responsible, so we can unmask even more Stasi agents.
Stasi-Agenten auch jetzt noch zu enttarnen.
But of course, everybody knows about the myth of Sisyphus. We're talking 16,000 sacks. 70 sacks have been processed so far. Is it not possible to speed it up somehow?
We
do want to speed up the process, and that's why we're using computers now to help us create a virtual reconstruction. We've got these computer programs that can put the fragments together much faster. It's important to bear in mind that we're dealing with documents, and we have to be sure that they actually mean something and that they're genuine.
Let's go back to the question we were talking about earlier. This is all about the Stasi collecting information about people, and that was a very cruel and very harsh process. How many cases have there been of Stasi people who have come out and said, I'm sorry, I got that very badly wrong, I regret it?
Of course, there are many reasons why people should own up to their Stasi activities. The first is to help us understand how the secret police system worked. It wasn't just some big apparatus. It was made up of individuals, all taking action. And each one can bear witness. We need them too, not just the files. We need to know how someone turns informer. Why do people become Stasi officers? And what did they do? The second reason is that we want to create an atmosphere that brings people together. In a democratic society, we should all try to live with and not against each other.
But this is 20 years have passed since the fall of the Berlin Wall, 2 decades. How many Stasi people have said sorry?
I can't say precisely. I do know that only very few have done it.
Why not more?
There
are many reasons. There's the fear of being despised by society. There are many who just don't have the moral stature to admit that they made a mistake. And others have found it easy to start a new life without having to explain what they did before. But I think one quality of a modern democratic society is that we lay open the truth, that we shed light on things, and learn from this period of dictatorship.
Okay. When you talk about learning from the past and learning from the present, perhaps, the Arab Spring is a phenomenon that we've seen in the last couple of years in countries like Tunisia and Egypt and elsewhere. And I know that people, representatives from the governments, or the authorities at least, in those countries have come to Germany, or you've been to their countries, and you've exchanged information about how to deal with files, with information. What can you tell me about that process?
Well, globally speaking, Germany did lead the way in dissolving a dictatorship's entire secret police. We'd never before seen citizens storming a secret police headquarters and securing their files, and then actually using them to shed light on how the dictatorship actually functioned. All the experience we gathered in making sure the files were protected, and also in getting the most out of them, is of course of huge interest to those people who are in the process of dismantling their own dictatorships. Especially in the Arab world, Egypt, Libya and Iraq. People are coming to us from such countries with questions. How did you organize it? How did you manage to balance the process of transparently revealing how the secret police worked with the need to protect the data on people who were spied on, interrogated or put in prison? All that data was collected in violation of their human rights, and these people must be protected.
Mm-hmm. That's a fascinating story about international cooperation, but we are now going to shift the focus back to Germany, and an area where there's great concern here in the country today. There have recently been revelations that a neo-Nazi terrorist group was apparently behind 10 murders, all but one, it seems, racially motivated, and that the group went undetected for over a decade. So, of course, big questions are being asked, such as how have the security forces here in Germany been turning a blind eye to the threat from the far right, and how great is that threat? That's something we can certainly talk about with Roland Jahn in just a minute, because he's a real expert there. But first, let's have a look at this report.
Heide Dannenberg is visiting her partner's grave. He was stabbed to death by a neo-Nazi 12 years ago. But the court said there was insufficient evidence that the perpetrator was a far-right extremist.
For all of us, it's not just painful, it's incomprehensible that he was not convicted for that.
Victims' advocacy groups say the crime clearly had radical right-wing motives, yet even today, Helmut Sackers is still not officially a victim of far-right crime.
It begins with police officers failing to even consider whether the crime had a far-right background. And it ends with the courts that still sometimes think that a far-right or racist motivation is irrelevant to the outcome of the trial.
During the period when a terrorist cell of 3 young neo-Nazis murdered at least 9 ethnic Turks and a policewoman, authorities likewise failed to see any far-right connections. The killers remained undiscovered for 14 years. The trio grew up in the high-rise housing developments of Jena, back during the 1990s, when, with impunity, far-right thugs terrorized people who thought or looked different. That was also when a key leftist meeting place became something of a besieged fortress, the young downtown community center, led by activist minister Lothar König. A scar next to his eye still bears witness to the violence he faced at the time. König says many mistakes were made back then.
They started in the schools and came from the youth affairs offices and involved policy all the way to the state level. They all failed. I won't even go into law enforcement. The anti-subversion police didn't just fail, they are a failure, at least in Thüringen. An absolute disaster.
Lothar König has been fighting the far-right scene for more than 20 years. He archives everything that's been written on the subject in Jena and the surrounding area. His offbeat community center has remained a bastion of resistance to the far right and a refuge for leftists in Jena.
They were under threat the entire time. Sometimes they feared for their lives. And we collected all that information. We did it here and kept trying to raise public awareness.
It has been a losing battle. Jena continues to struggle with an image as a neo-Nazi stronghold. Authorities have only begun to change their approach since the terrorist cell was uncovered. Files on unsolved killings have been reopened. That's far too little, too late, say anti-Nazi activists like those here in Jena. They accuse the police and justice system of casting a blind eye on far-right crime. And Heide Dannenberg also keeps fighting to resolve the circumstances surrounding her companion's death.
There's a lot to talk about there. Let's begin with this, the revelations we've had about this neo-Nazi terror cell based in East Germany, killing 9 people, racial hate crimes over a number of years, and a policewoman as well, so 10 people. What's your reaction?
Well, first of all, I find it awful that something like that can happen in Germany. And then that it was done by young people from my hometown is additionally upsetting. Of course, I can't avoid the question of how children in that town can grow up to be murderers.
And what's the answer?
There are no simple answers, because there are many, many things that could have been behind their development. We must look very carefully at what those influences might be. And we have to cast our inquiry right back to their personal development in East Germany as well.
Well, tell me about that first. Tell me about what is the... There are roots of the problem here, and the roots go back to East German times. What you know about this because as a journalist you worked in this area. What can you tell me about that scene in East Germany?
It's important to note that there were also conditions in East Germany that allowed people to develop extreme right-wing tendencies. We know from our files that the Stasi was aware of this and did follow it up sometimes. But it also tried to cover it up. It stifled any public debate about it, because it didn't want news to get out that there were far-right extremists in East Germany too. We've seen what they got up to from the files. People did glorify the Nazi time. They did gang up and destroy Jewish cemeteries. They were active. They lived out their prejudices.
Zerstört haben, hier aktiv auch ihre Haltung ausgelebt.
So
that needs to be talked about.
Okay, and what you're saying is it happened back then and it's happening now. Why is it still happening now? This is a new, reformed, reunited Germany.
That's the point. We need an open discussion about the East German era. However, you must also consider that the people we're talking about now were only 12, 14 or 16 years old when the regime collapsed. But that's part of it. We have to look at this time of upheaval, at the loss of orientation people suffered in East Germany. And we have to look at the present day, why the state, the intelligence services, the police are unable to protect people from such violence. All these questions must be openly addressed. We need the state's actions to be transparent. All of that will give us a chance to find the answers we seek. Whether we will is another matter, but we must look for them.
Antworten zu finden. Ob wir sie finden werden, wissen wir nicht. Wir müssen aber danach suchen.
And you're talking a lot here about what we need to do. Let's talk in concrete terms about your hometown of Jena. Everybody's saying it's a Schande, it's a disgrace, it's a scandal for Jena. What are the people in your hometown doing? Are they doing enough?
Also, in Jena wird sehr viel getan.
Well, there's a lot going on in Jena. The townspeople have got mobilized to signal that the majority of people in Jena will stand up for freedom and democracy. The same ideals I stood up for. And they all remember the peaceful revolution. They remember that they were the ones that helped to shake off dictatorship in East Germany. And I think that's a very important signal. Jena stands for freedom and democracy, and not for right-wing extremism.
Okay, and when you're talking about the process of shaking off oppression, shaking off the former communist rulers of East Germany, you were very involved in that process because you smuggled secret cameras to demonstrators in Leipzig who filmed the Monday demonstrations. Just tell us a little bit about that story.
That's right. As I was saying, it's important to remember that the people in the east of Germany managed to overthrow a dictatorship and that it can help in combating right-wing extremism. There was a system of fear that made people go along with this dictatorship for so long, and we have to expose it and also show that it is possible to break that system. The demonstrations that brought about the end of East Germany showed it. It was crucial that 70,000 people went out onto the streets and that we supported it. My friends in East Germany showed great courage and initiative and took huge risks to smuggle the pictures to the West. And I was able to broadcast them on the television here and show the world what was happening. That proved that it is possible to change things that seem unchangeable, if only you don't give up.
Wenn man nicht aufgibt, kann man es schaffen, auch Zustände zu ändern, die scheinbar nicht änderbar sind.
Give me the shortest possible answer to the following question. Do you miss East Germany?
I don't miss East Germany, but I do miss friends that I used to live with who are now spread all over the world.
Freunde, mit denen ich früher zusammengelebt habe, die jetzt in der Welt verteilt sind.
Okay. A relatively short answer. Okay, when East Germany crumbled, as we've already seen, much of what the former communist state had stood for was, for better or worse, consigned to history, including many of the products that the people of East Germany had grown up with. But as we find out now, some have survived.
Famous products from East Germany: Rotkäppchen sparkling wine, pickles from the Spreewald region, and chocolate treats. These are all items that were sold in communist East Germany and are still found on store shelves today. Fit dishwashing fluid is still made in the town of Zittau.
We had the important advantage that our products were very famous in communist East Germany. And the reason for that was that they were good. They had a high standard of quality. So those two aspects made it easier for our products to survive.
But most goods made in the former East didn't survive. One study found that of the 700 different products made in communist East Germany, only 120 are still in existence. Hamburg-based researcher Christian Dunker knows the secret to their success.
The interesting thing about surviving products from the former East is that they're high quality, but never top of the line. Their price is somewhat below that. They're positioned between premium and discount brands. They offer good value, quality for a fair price.
But even among the Eastern brands now available nationwide, customers in the East still account for the majority of sales. Dunker warns that could be a long-term problem.
An old saying says that if you don't advertise, you fade away. And that goes for regional expansion too. Recognition and trust for these brands is stronger in the East. In the West, they still have to build up trust and spread their appeal. They have to advertise, boost their presence, and convince customers.
But it's not that easy, as Fit boss Wolfgang Groß will tell you. After the fall of communism, Eastern companies had to invest millions in research and production to keep up with the competition. Little was left for advertising.
It's extremely difficult, because in order to have money for advertising, you first have to turn a profit. Only then is there money for advertising costs.
But products from the East have to remain competitively priced to survive. Even 20 years after the fall of communism, they still don't have the financial backing of their Western competitors. But even so, Wolfgang Groß and his 110-strong workforce are confident they can continue to hold their own.
Fascinating for me, because the washing up liquid Fit, I didn't know that this is an East German product. I have learnt this from this report. When you go shopping, do you have an idea this is an East German product, this is a West German product?
Nein.
Nothing.
No, but I do understand people who do. I just shop for quality, and if they're a good quality Eastern German product, then I'll buy them. More important is having things you've loved for years, because they remind you of home.
deswegen liebt, weil sie ein Stück Heimat sind. Weil sie,
Heimat.
Weil sie etwas sind,
yes, they're part of the region you're from.
aus der Region stammt, wo man gelebt hat.
Yeah.
Was man verbindet.
Well, give me an example. Give me an example from your...
Ja, wenn ich nach Thüringen
Whenever I
fahre,
go back to Thüringen, I eat their bratwurst. It tastes good, and it reminds me of the time I spent there.
Einerseits gut schmeckt und zusätzlich noch die Erinnerung an meine Zeit in Thüringen beinhaltet.
So that for you is the taste of childhood. That is what you when you eat the sausage, you think, childhood.
Ja, klar.
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly. It's the taste of my childhood, the taste of my youth, and of where I come from.
Der Geschmack der Heimat.
It's like staying with one's parents and eating your favorite childhood meal.
Zu seinen Eltern fährt und die Lieblingsgerichte seiner Kindheit isst.
Yeah. In our first report, in the portrait of you that we had earlier, you used, because you've been using this German word Heimat, home. Yeah, English-speaking people know this word because of the film Heimat and what have you. You talked in the first report about Heimatverlust, about losing your Heimat, losing your home when you came to the West. Can you describe that a little bit for me?
Ja, das ist ja das Problem gewesen.
The problem really was being forcibly ejected from my home country against my will. It's a bit like taking someone from Britain or from Greece away and never letting them go home. It's the sort of intervention that leaves a lasting mark on a person. It's a crucial thing to be able to decide oneself where to live and what one calls home. And that has a lot to do with the people you share your life with.
Seine Heimat findet. Und Heimat hat ja immer etwas mit Menschen zu tun, mit denen man gemeinsam lebt.
Let me just wind up by asking you, you've been in your present job in charge of the Stasi archives for a year now, and obviously what you're doing is you're reprocessing or processing the past. How long do you think we will need the Stasi archive in the future?
We still need the Stasi archives. Looking through these files helps us to understand how the dictatorship worked. And it'll help future generations to understand it. They too will want to know what it was like. They'll have their own questions. It's part of a nation's memory.
Haben Fragen und es ist das Gedächtnis einer Nation.
Okay, so we're talking about generations. Let's move on to something just not trivial, but something a little bit easier going now. We're going to finish with our traditional Talking Germany quiz, yeah? And I'd like to ask you sort of some quick questions, quick answers, yeah? Roland Jahn, are you a rebel or a bureaucrat?
A rebel, whenever I see that injustices have been done.
Wenn Ungerechtigkeiten geschehen.
Ah, very good. What do you understand more, anger or forgiveness?
I think I am prepared to forgive. But first, someone has to admit they've done wrong.
Okay. What is the biggest danger in Germany for democracy? Right-wing terrorism or left-wing violence and terrorism?
I think it's a mistake to compare far left and far right. It's more important to uphold human rights and tolerance and take action against terrorism.
Okay, I have more questions, but I think we're going to leave it on that very good note. He's been a really good guest, a really interesting man, a fascinating life. I've been very grateful for his insights about that life. If you've enjoyed his company as much as I have, then do come back next week. Roland Jahn was my guest. Until then, bye-bye. Cheers.